All right, so here. I promised you that I would get to this Alexander Hamilton thing because I'm so sick of hearing, first of all, about Alexander Hamilton. Because Alexander Hamilton is why we have Obamacare, why we have the gigantic growth of government that we have, and why the government is taxing and spending for what it calls the general welfare. Now, back in the day, there are two references, and this whole, it's so typical of Hollywood and New York and the cultural media to celebrate a guy like Alexander Hamilton because he's basically a big spend, tax and spend liberal is what he was, who bastardized the Constitution. And unfortunately, every court following his, declaration that that's what this is all about, that the general welfare clause is all about, is that's where we are constantly in a situation where we're in. Courts have reaffirmed that view of the general welfare clause, which James Madison had zero desire for that to be the way the general welfare clause played out when he wrote it, right? He wrote it. So anyway, but of course the liberals all celebrate Alexander Hamilton because he's the original founding father liberal. Is what he is. So what happened is the U.S. Constitution has two references to the general welfare clause. One's in the preamble. The other is in the tax and spend clause, taxing and spending clause in the Constitution as well. The preamble's been left alone. The Supreme Court has said, listen, it's basically not a source of any substantive power conferred on the government or the U.S. or any of its departments. So that you can't use the preamble general welfare reference. But ultimately what happened is the taxing and spending clause was the Supreme Court basically interpreted that to be, okay, a federal power to spend federal revenues on matters of general interest to the federal government. Well, what do you think's going to happen after all that? That was in 1833, and then 100 years later they did the federal income tax, and then of course everything exploded. Because, of course, you take away Supreme Court's views that the federal power to spend federal revenues on matters of general interest to the federal government, well, that just leaves open the door for everything. But that was and the court at the time called that the Hamiltonian view of the general welfare clause, which allows the federal government to spend money and tax for anything it deems good for the general welfare. Now, Madison early on said, and basically in the Federalist Papers rolled it out. And he said, no, this general welfare clause, there are very few and defined roles, powers of the federal government, and those are very strictly defined and limited. The powers of the states are numerous and indefinite is what he said. So he said all the powers that the federal government has are reserved to external objects of war, peace, negotiation, foreign commerce. That's pretty much it. There's the enumerated powers of the federal government in the Constitution. And so he had zero design that the tax and spend clauses were not supposed to be powers of their own, but descriptions of the purposes of those limited and enumerated powers that were already mentioned. So you can't just simply start inventing new general welfare definitions, because Madison said the general welfare, what I intended to be is only those limited to what the federal government ought to be doing, which is protecting us, regulating commerce, and securing our borders, and that's pretty much it. But when Hamilton got his dirty, rotten, liberal fingers in the whole thing, and then the Supreme Court followed along with him because he was influential, whatever, then it just opened the door to what we have right now. And I'm telling you, it's why we have Obamacare. It's why it was okay when the Supreme Court talked about, is it a tax or isn't it a tax? Is it this? That's where they were interpreting the general welfare clause as it relates to taxing and spending. And that's all Hamilton's fault, because he expanded government that way. He allowed for the expansion of government, and for whatever reason, Madison, who wrote the darn thing, was ignored. I have no idea why, but he was throughout history, and so of course you're going to have Broadway just celebrating Alexander Hamilton. I haven't seen the play. I don't even really know what. It's probably
I haven't either.
very nice to him. And, everybody, now they have a soundtrack. And all these goofballs like Kelly Clarkson and who else but Usher are now singing songs about Alexander Hamilton. And I'm sure Jay-Z's in the bunch there, and maybe even Beyonce. But I mean that's so typical, and nobody understands that. They're like, "Oh, Alexander Hamilton." It's like then I gotta talk to my mom and people. I can't wait to see Alexander Hamilton the play. He's a dunce. You know that, Mom, don't you? He's a liberal. I don't care. So anyway, just so you know, when everybody starts talking, because Alexander Hamilton's probably going to come here at some point.
Yeah.
And we're all going to have to sit through the celebration of the quintessential liberal. I feel bad about the duel that he had with Aaron Burr.
I'm not really
that he
familiar
lost.
with
Feel
that.
bad
He
about
lost.
Oh, they hated each other. He lost the duel, yeah. Well, the problem was he fired a shot. Normally in a duel, the general thing was that guys would take their guns and they would fire one shot into the ground. And essentially the duel would be over. You wouldn't really do that. Generally, that's what guys did. They didn't really die necessarily. They would shoot they'd go out to this island or go out someplace, shoot the guns into the ground, the first shot. That would indicate courage, but wouldn't, end a life. So Hamilton decided he was going to waste his shot by firing it into the air right past Aaron Burr. And once Aaron Burr heard the musket ball whiz by him into a tree, he shot Hamilton. Yeah. So
That's what you do, right?
Hamilton was not smart about what he was doing. He should have, if he was going to do anything, because he pledged the night before. He goes, I'm going to waste my shot. I don't like duels. And so he was going to do that. But you don't waste your shot by firing it right past the head of the guy you're in a duel with. Because that would naturally then have that person shoot you.
Yeah, that was a bad idea.
So, yeah, it was his second bad idea.